This is The Roxanne Show. Get ready. It's time to rise. I want to actually start with a Brené Brown quote, because when I have talked about vulnerability, when I've shared my personal perspective on what vulnerability means to me and how it shows up more often than not in my personal life, I've actually been told, oh, you sound like Brené Brown, and she did a TED Talk, and it sounds like her definition around vulnerability. So as I was getting ready for this episode and creating my notes, I finally went to watch her TED Talk because I had never seen it before. I'd never even seen her definition of it. So I took in the TED Talk. I thought it was wonderful. What I really thought was wonderful, and I absolutely felt deep resonance with, was her written expression of it. So I'm going to read that now. So her definition of vulnerability is: the definition of vulnerability is uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. But vulnerability is not weakness. It's our most accurate measure of courage. And that literally gives me chills. It tears right into the heart of what it means for me. So I want to share some of the pillars. I frame these as pillars of what true vulnerability means, kind of jumping off of that quote. Number one, you operate with authenticity in any and all circumstances. So that really, leans into her saying you are, it's emotional exposure, right? Because when you're being your authentic self, you're not hiding behind anything. It's you are fucking who you are, and that's what you're putting out into the world, which leads to the second pillar. You hide behind nothing. You are fully exposed. Again, there's no costumes, there's no masks. There's nothing hiding the true you, right? There's no performance that is not you showing up as the true you, right? So it's really, really, really risky in a way, right? Because if you face any kind of rejection, it's really, coming at your authentic self. Like somebody's really rejecting who you truly are. Whereas like if you had some kind of persona that wasn't you, or some kind of costume, it's just my kind of how I frame it. But, you can probably take that rejection and almost like easier in a way, because it's not you showing up in your naked skin. You've got something on you that isn't you, that you're exuding out into the world. So, whatever comes at you from that, it kind of absorbs into the costume, if you will. Whereas when you're being who you truly are, like that's going straight into your being. So you really, really, have to become fucking resilient around rejection when you are showing up as your authentic self, which is always going to mean that you're being vulnerable, right? Another core pillar in expressing true vulnerability is that when you speak from your heart, right? And this really goes with the whole being authentic, right? When I speak, I'm speaking from my heart, which doesn't mean that my mind's not a part of, what I'm saying or sharing. It just means that, your heart is really where your true self lives. I always say, like, your authentic self is, it resides inside of your heart, right? And so when you are speaking from your heart, you are absolutely, very, very vulnerable in that moment. So you could be having like a hard conversation, with somebody that you love, and you're really, really, you're not defensive. You're speaking very honestly, right? Again, from your heart, you are absolutely vulnerable in that moment. So that is absolutely a core pillar, speaking from your heart. Another core pillar, and this is one I've definitely, it's like a through line in my life, is that you take chances that matter to you. You bet on yourself. Every single time I've bet on myself in my life, to this fucking day, I'm so vulnerable, because I don't know the outcome. That was in Brené's quote as well, uncertainty, risk. Anytime you're taking a chance, in an effort to reach for something that matters to you, to some kind of experience, some kind of, a goal, vision that you want to actualize, right? You are absolutely being vulnerable. So if you think about like anytime you're starting a business or doing something in your business where, it's something new to you, or, in my world, it's like, oh my gosh, I moved to a foreign country where I didn't speak the language. I mean, this is all powerful expressions of vulnerability, right? But just inserting this here, but I'm going to tease this out, in no part of these actions I'll just use me as the example, was I ever, head down, kind of sad, or like, just kind of like a lower vibe, lower frequency. In fact, again, like Brené's quote, it's this most accurate measure of courage. I was executing with absolute courage. I mean, in my business today, right? Building grassroots from my heart, from a vision, right? It's all risk. It's all courage, right? And that's completely a vulnerable experience. Every day, I'm fucking vulnerable as an entrepreneur who's building from my heart, from integrity, from authenticity, and ultimately from a vision that I hold for myself, right? So that might be you too. And it's just, again, we don't necessarily always point to, oh, well, this is a very vulnerable act. But in fact, it's the most vulnerable act because you don't know what's going to, come from it, right? I don't know I know what I want to come from it. I know what I'm aiming to come from it. I know what I'm willing to do to assure that I can get the outcome that I would like to experience. But in the end, we don't really know, right? And the truth is that this is where most people back down. And they're not willing to take the risk, right? They're not willing to bet on themselves because the uncertainty is too fucking scary. And, the feeling of potential loss outweighs the feeling of the potential gain and win, right? So next time that, you're doing anything that involves risking, betting on yourself, I hope that you realize the power of vulnerability that you are executing from in that moment, right? That's the goal of sharing these pillars with you right now, is for you to think about yourself and your life as you're going through your process and realize that, there's so many more moments than maybe you're aware of where you're actually living from the act, the emotion, the expression of vulnerability. And what I'm really pointing out is how badass it is, right? And because I think a lot of times the expression of vulnerability that most are familiar with or kind of connect the dots with is that, you're showing up, you're crying, you're sad. It's, some kind of, again, like a lower frequency energy. But what I'm sharing here is that's not true. I mean, certainly in those moments you're being vulnerable, but these moments are also so vulnerable. In fact, maybe even more vulnerable in a lot of cases, but they're so fucking powerful and they're so badass that a lot of people may not associate that the expression in the act as an act of vulnerability. Thanks so much for listening, you guys. Please like, subscribe, and share. And don't forget to leave us a 5-star rating and review.